And this is a direct quote. The Kiev soldiers won't hesitate, they will fight with spades. Because the very existence of Ukraine is at stake. It is a shame that he did not mention who put at stake the very existence of Ukraine. All of them, all these authorities of the Kiev regime headed by Zelensky and all the predecessors who were brought to power as political figures by Western supervisors, but this idea never occurred to them. But it was the team of Zelensky who put at stake everything that existed in Ukraine: people, resources, lands. Kuleba is responsible for this also, but he doesn't mention this. The future of Ukraine should be determined not in the West. The future of Ukraine should be determined by the Ukrainian people, but there is a following problem. Due to this puppet government, the people of Ukraine is rightless, and they have no right at all for a very long time. On January the 18th, we will celebrate a landmark event in our history. 370 years ago, during a Pereyaslav Rada convened at the initiative of Hetman Bogdan Khmelnytsky, a historical decision was made. Zaporizhian host was accepted under the authority of the Moscow Tsar. And our people who were going through this historical hardship in the united old Russian state, they were united again. Back then, a considerable part of today's Ukraine was under the yoke of the Polish gentry. Hetman Khmelnytsky headed a people's liberating war against the Polish and Lithuanian dominance. The assistance provided by the Russian state enabled these people to free themselves from external intervention. Zelensky regime, who is obsessed with rewriting history, drew no lessons from the past. The Western elites considered him to be a suitable figure to implement all his functions. Thanks to Zelensky, the state is losing all the remnants of its independence and sovereignty. Now it is a colony of the West, fully dependent of external control. Millions of Ukraine are now again on the verge of survival. However, Kiev authorities could not care less for their own benefit. Their imaginary military victory over Russia, they are ready to sacrifice the lives of millions of Ukrainians. They are depriving Ukraine of its wealth, of its history, of religion. And this means only one thing: they are depriving Ukraine of its future. I can also reaffirm one more fact. This all testifies to the relevance of objectives of the special military operation. We will publish additional materials, additional historical materials, including in the text of this briefing, which will describe this historical date. It is quite important to know this date. These facts are very interesting. I understand that history books are being rewritten in Ukraine, but you cannot oppose anything to these facts. These are mere facts, and we won't let them to be forgotten. We are following closely the situation in Moldova. We paid attention to the award-giving ceremony to the President of Moldova on January the 13th, an award for European values, entitled Timisoara for European Values. In her welcoming remarks, Maya Sandu made her traditional, unsubstantiated accusations of Russia in attempts to destabilize the situation in the country, to undermine democracy, to launch a hybrid war, and to carry out a misinformation campaign. She also mentioned that the European Union now has a chance to reestablish historical justice after when in 1945 the Eastern Europe was destined to live under oppression. If we consider the fact that she is a Romanian citizenship, we understand why she hates the conditions people lived in after World War II. They were fighting for this freedom. And together with other peoples of the Soviet Union and anti-Hitler coalition, they won this victory over fascism and Nazism. And later, they were reconstructing their native land.
If we recall that Maria Sandu is a citizen of Romania, it's clear the reason of her hatred. After such pseudo-historical excursions, I believe it is appropriate to remind once again what kind of oppression and deprivation, in inverted commas, Moldova faced after 1945. As a part of the Soviet Union, Moldova transformed from an agrarian country with a gutted economy into a prosperous agrarian industrial republic. During this period, come to think of this, more than 500 industrial enterprises, 550 to be precise, were put into operation on its territory. Electricity production increased almost sixfold from 3 to 17 billion kilowatt hours. Almost the entire present-day transportation infrastructure was formed. Only from 1946 to 1950 to restore and modernize the Moldovan Railroad, 3 billion rubles from the USSR budget was spent. Compared to 1940, the agricultural production by 1990 grew in 3.7 times. The result of all these transformations was the population growth by 77%. There is a specific figure to this. There used to be 2.46, translated into 4.36 million people. What is happening now? Does Maria Sandu want to explain us? I will be the one to do so. One of the main election promises of Maria Sandu in 2020 was the formation of a state, as she put it, based on the rule of law, improvement of citizens' welfare and economic development. In reality, today, 1/3 of the population lives below the poverty line. Cumulative inflation in a little more than 3 years after Maria Sandu's election amounted to 54.5% since 1991. Moldova's population has fallen by 41%, which is a horrific figure. Come to think of this, which is almost a half to 2.5 million people, and this process goes on. Youths are fleeing the country from poverty and disenfranchisement. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, in 2023-2024 academic year, there are 56,000 students in the higher education system, while in 2007 there used to be 132,000 students. You can calculate the number of times. 3 times is the reduction of the number of students. Is there any comparison figure? Is there a wrong quotation from our side? To accuse, to give names, to threaten is something the Moldovan authorities at power can do. What about figures and facts? Are you capable of countering anything to us? The Moldovan authorities eradicate any dissent, block the broadcasting of independent media, they persecute the opposition, openly blackmail their own people. There's a consistent policy to reject national identity, the native Moldovan language, and to rewrite history, which is a trend of Sandu. A fresh example is the initiative of Romanian unionists to rename one of the central streets of Chisinau. The street was previously named after Alexander Pushkin. Now it was dubbed the street named after Queen Maria of Romania. Forgive me, it is a spit, not just in the face of the Moldovan people, but also in the face of democracy. that same democracy Sandu is discussing so much, how many more streets will be dedicated to previous monarchies? And how many squares, public venues, and sites will have this royalist tint? There is a different aspect to the question. If the current Chisinau leadership used the current policy for the election campaign, then there would be no complaints. If they had previously announced that they're going to rewrite the Moldovan history, they're going to renounce the Moldovan language and prefer the Romanian one, if they had announced that instead of people who truly fought for the freedom and independence, as well as democracy of Moldova, they glorified representatives of monarchy houses of other countries. If all this had been supported by the people of Moldova, we would have no questions now. But, I mean, the team of Sandu used totally different points. What kind of democracy is this that cancels their own language, calling central streets, naming rather central streets after representatives of monarchies of other countries? It isn't democracy, it is colonialism, in fact. Against this backdrop, people from Bucharest appointed to the Moldovan state institutions. Thus, in December 2023, a former Romanian finance minister, Anca Dragu, became the new head of the National Bank. Daniel Marius Staik was appointed as the head of the Service for Prevention and Combating Money Laundering, and a number of Romanian advisors were employed at the Prosecutor General's Office and Ministry of Justice and other ministries and agencies of the country. Apparently, it is the promotion of all these European values that led Maia Sandu to receiving a bonus of 30,000 euros in this award. In Moldova, such a policy of the authorities is already now being called as hybrid colonization under the guise of European integration. Residents of the country are increasingly protesting against the anti-people and anti-Russian policy of the leadership. The Moldovans remember and cherish their history and culture. I emphasize their national culture and history. Their ancestors spilled their blood for it. They worked hours and hours at factories and in the fields. They cherish ties with Russia, their friend, and we fully share this attitude and are committed to fostering cooperation with our Moldovan friends. We had a lot of questions and requests to comment on the escalation regarding the escalation in Iraq and northern Syria. We are closely following the development of the situation in this region. On January 15th, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps fired combination of missiles and drones at a number of sites on the territory of the Kurdistan, on the territory of the autonomous Kurdistan region of Iraq, that Tehran believes are associated with external forces engaged in subversive activities against Iran. At the same time, in response to recent terrorist attacks, the IRGC launched missile strikes against facilities used by ISIS and other terrorist organizations in northern Syria, particularly in the Idlib province. In addition, the Turkish Defense Ministry has recently announced a successful military operation against Kurdish groups in Syria and Iraq, during which more than 70 targets of the Kurdistan Workers' Party were hit. According to Ankara's statements, these, as they put it, retaliatory strikes were a reaction to the deaths of 9 servicemen of the Turkish armed forces in northern Iraq on January 13th. We're deeply convinced of the importance of continuing the uncompromising fight against the terrorist groups wherever they may be. At the same time, we believe that the conduct of any counter-terrorist operations in the territory of other states would be only permissible only in agreement and in coordination with the governments of those countries, namely our friends Syria and Iraq. Such an approach would, among other things, minimize civilian casualties and humanitarian risks. The Russian Federation has consistently advocated the need to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria and Iraq, as well as the swift withdrawal from their territories of all illegally deployed foreign troops. The current crisis immediately results from the unprecedented escalation of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and Washington's short-sighted policy of preventing its sustainable settlement in order to further militarize the Middle East. Moreover, in violation of all norms in international law, the United States is nurturing and using terrorist groups, including ISIS and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, for its own selfish purposes. These terrorists once again showed their true face on January 3rd during the mourning ceremony at the cemetery in Kerman of Iran, where 95 people who gathered to honor the memory of General Soleimani were killed. The Americans, in fact, are acting in the same fashion, not hesitating to organize public actions in order to physically eliminate their opponents. In this connection, it's appropriate to recall the killing on the 4th of January as a result of a drone strike against one of the commanders of the Shiite movement Hezbollah, al-Jabr Mushtaq al-Jabari. This act of international terrorism provoked a wave of protests in Iraq demanding the immediate withdrawal of the United States military from the country. The direct involvement of the United States in the destabilization of the regional situation through its illegal presence and illegal actions in Syria, as well as the new aggression against, together with British accomplices in Yemen, which has actually disrupted the beginning of a political settlement in the country, caused our deep alarm and concern for the future of the Middle East and in general for the global security. A couple topics related to the UN Security Council. Recently, the UK distributed to the UN Security Council a letter demanding that item 66 is retained on the UN Security Council agenda, which is the letter dated March 13, 2018 from the interim charge d'affaires of the UK permanent mission to the United Nations addressed to the President of the Security Council, which is the Skripal's case. At the same time, London is not embarrassed by the fact that in the briefing by the UN Secretary General dated January 2nd, the above item is on the list that the United Nations Security Council has not dealt with at any official meaning in the 3-year period, from January 2021 to December 2023. This step by the British is perplexing, since it is the British side that has been persistently avoiding a substantive dialogue with us for almost 6 years to clarify all the circumstances of what happened, including the provision of samples of the substance identified, as they put it, as some Novichok. Let me remind you that on March 4, 2018, Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were found unconscious near a shopping centre in Salisbury of the county Wiltshire in southwest England. The police arrived and found a container with an unknown substance. Scotland Yard began a closed criminal investigation. It followed by sensationalization, media hype. Theresa May, Prime Minister, spoke in the Parliament. There was an expulsion of diplomats and many, many other events. The events include everything except for facts. At the same time, after the incident in Salisbury, the British authorities refused any cooperation with the Russian competent authorities on the investigation of the incident. In response to reports handed over in April 2018 for legal assistance in the criminal case concerning the attempted murder of Yulia Skripal, submitted by the Russian Prosecutor General's Office, the British Ministry of the Interior, the Foreign Office informed our embassy of the decision of the British authorities to reject the relevant Russian requests. In general, since the provocation in Salisbury, the Russian embassy in London has sent more than 60 notes to the British Foreign Office, in which many questions on the Skripal's case have been formulated, most of which remain unanswered, and at some points only formal replies were given. One can also recall the way the British went around the capitals of all EU member states and persuaded them without presenting the evidence that they should expel Russian diplomats, promising that the facts would be provided later. Later, however, a surprising thing happened. The materials that the British presented as facts fell into the hands of journalists. These were 5 pages of a presentation prepared by a 3 or 4 grader of a primary school, with circles, arrows, schematic sketches. The point was Russia did this because Russia did so previously and could do so. This is about it. The majority of European Union countries followed the trend. Some did not. They did not expel Russian diplomats. Later, we privately asked those who joined the action, whether they had been presented with any evidence beyond London's presentation, in addition to highly likely public statements. Many countries of the European Union replied to us, no evidence had been presented whatsoever. There is more to it than this. No evidence had been presented to anyone. Never. Neither to individual EU countries, nor to the EU as an association, nor to NATO members, nor during NATO entity meetings, nor during summits, nor to the local communities or media, or the media. Never did London present any evidence, but there is evidence that London lied all along. It is that same Scotland Yard that began the investigation, but throughout the years conducted one media stakeout where it unclearly explained that it worked on something and promised soon results. We truly regret about the professionals of Scotland Yard that were dragged into a dirty political intrigue of the global scale. They were framed, in fact, by being given this case. I call upon the journalist community to inquire Scotland Yard about their views on the letter of the permanent mission of the UK to the United Nations, that the United Nations Security Council should pursue the Skripal's case no matter what. I think Scotland Yard have a word to say to British diplomats on this subject. We intend to continue finding the truth. We still expect comprehensive answers to the following questions. Where did the Skripals go on the morning of March 4, 2018 with their phones turned off? How did it happen that they fell unconscious almost simultaneously a few hours after the so-called poisoning? And first aid was provided by an allegedly passing by senior nurse of the British CBRN forces. Where are the Skripals now? What is their state of health? Are they free in their contacts and actions? Is there anyone throughout these long years from British independent media outlets, did anyone have an opportunity to have a look at these individuals, to talk to them, to ask them these obvious questions? Expressing its deep concern about the fate of the Skripals, the Russian side regularly urges the British authorities to promptly provide relevant information and ensure consular access to Russian citizens in accordance with the provisions of the 1963 Vienna Convention on Consular Relations and the next 1965 Bilateral Consular Convention. The facts clearly indicate that the British side is not interested in a fair and impartial trial in the Skripal's case and is deliberately delaying the investigation into the incident in Salisbury. They seem to consider that as they're going to provoke the Kiev regime for relevant anti-Russian actions, galvanizing it into creating a NATO platform that would result in the exacerbation of the regional context, everything would be forgotten. And Russia's strategic defeat is a reach away. And all the dirty stories that they have concocted about the Skripals, about Amesbury too, and all the things that they have done in the recent years. Nobody will remember this, but everything went not as planned. We remembered this, and we will never forget this, and we regularly remind London of all this. The London actions clearly indicate that this has been a concocted job, the orchestrated incident, the real purpose of which was to damage Russia's bilateral relations and international reputation. There is one more issue related General Assembly draft resolution on space science. We'd like to sensitize you on the dangerous trend of the United States and their allies using commercial satellites as well as ground infrastructure declared as civil equipment to support combat activities of foreign troops and intervene in foreign affairs, in domestic affairs of sovereign states. In fact, they are testing new leverages to provoke domestic shocks and ousting authorities that do not fit into the rules-based world order. They create serious risks for the security of spatial operation and long-term stability of spatial activities. This is fraught with negative consequences for multiple socioeconomic processes depending immediately on space technologies. SDGs adopted by the UN General Assembly are at risk. The Russian Federation has prepared and submitted for consideration to the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space a draft resolution, Space Science and Technology for Promoting Peace. This document is to crystallize on the state-to-state level the overall understanding on the inadmissibility of the application of civil space systems to use force against geopolitical opponents, thus making them a legitimate aim for reciprocal measures, including the military ones. We hope that the Russian draft resolution, Space Science and Technology for Promoting Peace, will gain wide international support and will sober up those who find it admissible today to stake spatial future of the entire humanity.
Let us speak about something similar. We received information on Washington plans to send a series of weapons to the self-proclaimed Republic of Kosovo, anti-tank missile systems Javelin with a considerable number of munitions. The noble intentions announced by the American party, which are to strengthen security of the European partner, to protect its sovereignty and territorial integrity, are nothing but a vivid example of cynicism and hypocrisy. I would like to ask a question to Washington. Perhaps there is no use in doing so, but perhaps to someone who is close to them, to journalists maybe. The United States of America say that they are delivering these arms to Kosovo, and by doing so, they reinforce and protect sovereignty and territorial integrity of their European partner. At the same time, Washington says that in this capacity they are viewing Belgrade as well. Tell me how Washington will guarantee Belgrade, Serbia, and the Serbian people their sovereignty and territorial integrity. Or Washington is not going to guarantee Serbia its territorial integrity and sovereignty. These two processes are not merely contradictory, they are incompatible. Let me remind you that in line with the UN Security Council Resolution 1244, which is the foundation of Kosovo settlement, the region has neither sovereignty nor related features, including territorial integrity, and from the point of view of international law, it is still a part of the Republic of Serbia. The objectives of ensuring the stability in Kosovo are laid upon the shoulders of the multilateral contingent created with Pristina and patrons and qualified as an army. They do nothing but satisfy nationalist ambitions of Kosovo Prime Minister Albin Kurti, who further escalates the situation and relations in Belgrade. He believes that the West will force Serbia to abandon its vital interests. It is quite obvious that that Kosovo authorities put a premium on forcing out Serbian-speaking population out of Kosovo to get rid of their obligations associated with the creation of Commonwealth of Serbian municipalities. You understand very well when we mention Kosovo and Kosovo governments, we call it the so-called Kosovo government. Speaking about the future of Kosovo, Kosovo Albans employ all possible means, including overt violence against civilians, children, and elderly people. Now, Kosovo radicals will receive more lethal arms. According to the US, this will reinforce their so-called independence. We decisively condemn all attempts to arm Pristina illegal military structures. Irresponsible approach, neglect to norms of international law, and Resolution 1244 undermine negotiation process on Kosovo and escalate the situation in Kosovo and on the Balkans in general. There is one more interesting trend associated with these armed deliveries to the center of Europe. Just listen what they say in Germany. In Sweden, there were some remarks. They repeat it every day in the Baltic states. The government of these countries say that the beginning of military action on the European continent is about to start. They associate these deliveries of javelins to Kosovo Albans with the plans of Anglo-Saxons. One more very important issue to discuss. We published a regular report on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs dedicated to the violations of human rights of Russian citizens and compatriots abroad. This is our priority task. However, statistics show no signs of improvement, and by the efforts of these countries of the collective West, negative trends are here to stay. Rights violations against Russian citizens are still multiple. To justify their unfavorable position, they use the following argument: the special military operation launched by the Russian Federation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. It is funny and it is ridiculous to read these accusations, given that all these illegal activities carried out against Russian compatriots abroad in a great number of states happened before 2022. Denial of citizenship, attempts to deprive many generations of people of their mother tongue, violations of rights to education, of receiving information in their native language. This all was happening before 2022, and it was the state policy of many European and NATO states. But now, from the point of view of Brussels, it is more convenient to associate all these actions with a special military operation, but it is a barefaced lie. Also, I would like to underline that the rights violations of Russian citizens, which occur on a day-to-day basis, are still here. The states which unleashed a sanction and a trade war against Russia, all these facts receive no attention from specialized international organizations, and it is quite obvious that anti-Russia sentiment to encourage the Kiev neo-Nazi regime gave an incentive to attempts of Poland, Baltic states, and Ukraine to increase and to boost, under the pretext of criticizing Russian aggression, the fight against memorials and monuments to commemorate the Red Army and the soldiers who liberated Europe from Nazism. They are engaged in rewriting history. Also, I would like to underscore that we discuss and analyze these cases not only in this report, but also in the regular report of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on glorification of the Nazism. The Russian-speaking community leaders also become victims in many states, such as the United States, Canada, Ukraine, Baltic states, who support dialogue with Russia, who support constructive relations with our country. Not because it is their political position, but because it is the part of their own culture. They want to preserve the historic memory they are also persecuted. They become victims of oppression. The authorities of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia have the most impressive results in anti-Russian sentiment and Russophobic attitude. They are trying to stamp out the Russian language from almost all educational establishments, and thus they deny the right to mother tongue to a great number of people. Also, they are preparing a mass deportation of Russian-speaking people. By doing so, they will ultimately address the Russian case. But we should address this problem in a different manner. Not by deportation, but granting citizenship on the basis of all international obligations of all these states. The Russian Foreign Ministry will do everything possible and adopt all possible diplomatic measures to protect Russian citizens in the light of the ongoing and unprecedented in its scale and intensity Russophobic campaign, which is adopting different forms of aggression against Russian citizens and Russian-speaking persons. We still have special channels of communication launched by Russian diplomatic missions. We harbor no illusions as to the true intentions of the collective West. Despite all of this, we will do everything possible to protect the rights of our citizens and compatriots. To that end, we will follow closely the situation and document all the discrimination cases abroad in order to draw attention of these state authorities both in bilateral and multilateral formats to such violations. We will urge them to respect their international legal obligations. The current situation reaffirms that manifestations of intolerance in Euro-Atlantic space. Now it is an overt xenophobia and racism. It is Russophobia, which is the most large-scale event. This all needs monitoring and a proactive position. It is quite obvious that the collective West, who proclaim themselves as role models, they could not get rid of discrimination and racist sentiment. It is their official policy over the course of the previous years. On January the 6th, the Conakry port received 25 tons of Russian grain, which was meant as humanitarian assistance to the Republic of Mali. On January the 9th, this humanitarian cargo was transferred to Malian authorities. This goes in line with the solution of the Russian President Vladimir Putin adopted during the Second Russia Summit in St. Petersburg on providing food assistance to a number of African states. This is the fourth shipment of Russian cargo on a free of charge basis. On June the 7th, on June the 18th, and on December the 6th, 2023, Russia's Amercom transferred 50,000 tons of grain and 22 tons of fertilizers. Russia will further provide assistance for African states through humanitarian assistance. Some more words about a very important historic project. On January the 10th, Rostov Regional Patriotic Public Movement Roads of Glory, Our History, will mark the anniversary of Andrei Gromyko, an outstanding Russian diplomat, and one more outstanding Russian diplomat, Yevgeny Primakov. This event will also be associated with the Diplomatic Workers' Day. We will mark this holiday on February the 10th. The contest jury will analyze and consider works of art. On February the 10th, we will hold our All-Russia Diplomatic Science and Practical Conference named after Gromyko, Diplomacy for Peace. We invite everyone who is interested in Russia's foreign policy to take part in this contest. We hope that our journalists will support this campaign. From February 20th to February the 23rd, Alexander Gorchakov Foundation will organize a contest for the participation in the second Youth Forum. Its objective is to preserve the memory of an outstanding diplomat, Vitaly Churkin. The forum will bring together representatives of the regions of Russia, former Soviet republics, Asia, Africa, Middle East, Latin America, and all other states, as well as experts, political scientists, economists, historians, students, public figures who are engaged in the sphere of foreign relations. The applications should be submitted until January the 21st. We will publish the link in the text of the briefing. One more important date. On January the 19th, we mark the 140th anniversary of a historian, diplomat, Ivan Maisky. He's a long-serving diplomat. He was working in Japan and Finland and Great Britain. He made a considerable contribution to the work of international conferences, including Crimea, Yalta, and Berlin Potsdam conferences, who became the foundation of the world order after the two wars. As Vice People's Commissar and later the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ivan Maisky was the head of Inter-Allied Reparation Commission in Moscow. It was in charge of developing a detailed plan of reparation procedures from Germany. Since 1947, Ivan Maisky was working in the Institute of History and later in the Institute of General History of the Academy of Sciences of USSR. He wrote many books. He has many publications on foreign policy of the USSR, including Mongolia on the Eve of Revolution, Memories of a Soviet Ambassador, Memories of Soviet Diplomat, People, Facts and Events, and many others. Of course, the diplomat's diary is of particular interest. It was published in 2006. It contains very detailed reports on contacts and meetings of Ivan Maisky when he was working abroad and in the central office. They reveal the distinct personality of Ivan Maisky. This book can serve as an example of the art of diplomacy for young diplomats and for general public. And of course, we see that there is interest to the personality and to the works of Ivan Maisky abroad. In 2015, Yale University published 3 volumes of its diaries. He was awarded many orders by the government of the USSR, and a memorial board is installed on the front of the house where Ivan Maisky lived. Also, I have to say, despite the fact that there is a great number of historical materials, documentaries, and so on, but we have to mention this issue in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It is our principled position to preserve history and historical truth. We cannot go without this, because it is our response to this global advance of Anglo-Saxon liberal dictatorship on historical facts. I would like to speak about the 80th anniversary of full liberation of Leningrad from fascist blockade. On January the 27th, 1944, the history of the Great Patriotic War was marked by the complete liberation of Leningrad. It was one of the lengthiest and the most violent battles. There were numerous attempts to free the town, but as a result of the Spark operation, the soldiers managed to break the siege and to evacuate the people. During 1944, during the offensive, Soviet troops liberated Leningrad, Novgorod, and the part of Kalinin regions. They repelled the enemy to the borders with Estonia and Latvia. Finland, who was nourishing ideas to capture a part of the Soviet territory, was forced to leave the war and to sign a truce treaty with the USSR. A successful offensive in this strategic direction was the precursor of the victory in this war. The blockade lasted for 872 days, since September the 8th, 1941, until January the 27th, 1944. During this time, from hunger, diseases, and shellings, more than 1 million of people died. Daily, up to 4,000 people were dying from malnutrition. In 2022, at the initiative of the Russia's Prosecutor General's office, St. Petersburg City Court recognized the actions carried out by occupation authorities, German authorities, together with their accomplices, as a crime of war, as a genocide, as a crime against humanity, against ethnic groups representing the USSR. The courage of the people and the defenders of Leningrad during the blockade became the symbol of unprecedented resilience, mass self-sacrifice, and patriotism. For more details, see the text version of the briefing, and we will translate this text into English. I am ready to answer your questions.
Ria Novosti, are you with us? Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. We have one question. The Polish MFA said that Warsaw agrees to deploy German troops on its territory, should Berlin wish so. What is Russia's take on these statements? It is yet another anti-Russian element of the global Russophobic policy of NATO countries, of this specific country. By way of reminder, currently Poland hosts about 10,000 American service people and also NATO's multinational battle group, including the forces of the United States, the UK, Romania, and Croatia. Obviously, calls to deploy additional foreign troops in Poland, of which there is no need if these countries are focused on peace, would only boost the level of tensions in Europe and would extend the period of the global ruination of the European security that should have been European security, but transformed into the demonstration of impossibility because of NATO's position, because of the position of the Anglo-Saxon duo that are ruling the whole situation. The Europeans thus failed to agree on the rules of coexistence, cooperation. Maybe they're doing so to add fuel to the fire. Let me remind you that in December 2023 alone, the Republic of Germany and Lithuania signed and agreed to boost German Defense Forces' presence in this Baltic state to a level of brigades. Similarly, the Polish authorities want to keep up with their neighbors in showing their loyalty to the big brothers from Berlin, Washington. We again confirm and underscore that boosting activities and military capacity of NATO and their allies in the vicinity of Russia and the Union State of Russia and Belarus are of provocative nature and would lead only to degradation of European security. This will be duly responded to. Whether Polish authorities intend to add these expenses to the financial requirements set to the Germans regarding the occupation during World War II would be a good question to ask them. Thank you so much. Moving on, Izvestia, are you with us? Good afternoon. Currently, Davos hosts the World Economic Forum. In your opinion, what are considerable documents that have been signed or any concepts that have been adopted in our absence during the recent days? The most funny thing is that The World Economic Forum in Davos this year is held under the motto "Rebuilding Trust," which isn't a joke. Truly, they have used this motto. By using this motto, they intended to consider such issues as achieving security and cooperation in the fractured world, creating growth and in jobs for a new era, artificial intelligence is a driving force for the economy and society, a long-term strategy for climate, nature, and energy. We have just discussed the lost prospects in the near future to rebuild security on the European continent. But as we understand, Davos is a European platform, of course with the involvement of the Euro-Atlantic component, but they represent Europe primarily in terms of its trade, economy, and the list goes on and on. What kind of rebuilding trust are we talking about when a number of NATO countries declare an obvious, according to them, an obvious thing? Discussing hostilities in Europe. I have just quoted decisions of Poland. I have just mentioned Swedish statements. Germany makes similar statements, let alone the Baltic states. It is one thing. The other thing is that in addition to the absurdity of discussing rebuilding trust because of NATO actions, the United States, the UK, and others that manifest themselves on a daily basis as aggressors, striking Yemen for one, did this add anything to rebuilding trust? No, instead it was yet another blow to trust. First, they approached the Security Council, demanding that the Security Council give indulgence for strikes, and having received none, distorted the nature of the Security Council. They still dealt a strike on the next day on a sovereign state. They sent arms to an illegal, self-proclaimed government in Kosovo that are not entitled whatsoever to any activities related to military cooperation separated from Belgrade, because they represent a part of Serbia. What rebuilding trust are we talking about? In addition to this, however, there is one more important subject that Davos should be dedicated to, by which I mean NATO's trade war. Or we could reformulate it in a different way. Trade war unleashed by the global minority against the global majority. And there would be many questions that we could discuss, not just sanctions but as a tool, but illegal, illegitimate sanction tools used by the collective West for many, many years whenever they fail to maintain competition or outmake their competitors in this competition. Within that same subject, we could consider collective West's blocking of originally peace tools for currency and financial operations, and using these tools for the sake of trade war. There would be a great topic, destroying the global energy cooperation on a peaceful and legal basis. That could be a good subject for Davos, closer to reality. Here, however, it isn't clear how and who is going to rebuild trust, considering that even during the pandemic period when the world should have reunited and come together, because this virus struck everyone, the rich, the poor, of different race, skin color, skull size, gender, or age, cultural identity. Still, the West used this point, this period, this tragedy of humanity, to further segregate people on all grounds, be it machinations, creating schemes around vaccines, preventing other countries from accessing, licensing, preventing vaccines from entering a number of countries of the world. So it's just hypocrisy. another orchestration Russia's foreign minister spoke about in his article that was published by Izvestia a year ago. Since you happen to be on the subject of documents, the Davos Forum, they are for the sake of exchanging opinions. They built on their publications, publications of financial organizations. It is very dissociated from reality. There are things that could not and should not reflect everyday needs because they are future focused, sustainable, but at the same time they should build on realistic forecasts. If they give motto rebuilding trust to the forum while building up military presence of NATO throughout the world, what trust, unilaterally I mean, and also dealing strikes to sovereign states, deploying their troops in contradiction to the volition of sovereign states, what kind of rebuilding trust in the economic field can we discuss? All this against the backdrop of the trade war conducted by the Westerners for many, many years. If it is it, if you have no questions, then we're moving on to the China Media Group. Good afternoon. We have two questions. Recently, the foreign minister of China, Wang Yi, said that the Red Sea situation is a representation of the Gaza conflict. According to him, the main priority is to put an end to this Gaza Strip war and to prevent the conflict from spilling over to beyond control. What is the take of the Russian side on this statement? What factors do exacerbate tensions in the Red Sea? We have already commented on the Red Sea situation during the US and UK strikes on Yemen during our briefing on the 12th of January. On that same day, as requested by Russia, the UN Security Council met on the topic. We explained our position regarding the developments in the Middle East. Russia's and China's positions on this issue, as well as on many other issues, are very similar. And it immediately results from the unprecedented escalation of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the escalation of the Yemeni crisis, that there are growing tensions in the Red Sea. USA military activities only exacerbate the current tensions situation because of the policy of their Americans and their allies can put an end to positive trends in Yemenite regulation and can only worsen the regional context and the global context too. Thank you so much. Our second question. On the 15th of January, the government of Nauru published a statement recognizing one China principle. The authorities severed ties with Taiwan and declare they're going to restore their relations with China. How can you comment on this? The principal stance of Russia is well known. It has been recently reaffirmed and remains unchanged. The principal stance of Russia on the issue of Taiwan is unchanged. There is only one China in the world. The PRC government is the only legitimate government representing the entire China and Taiwan as its integral part. But the relations between the coast of the Taiwan Strait is a domestic affair of China. As to the decision of Nauru authorities, it is a sovereign choice of an island state, of the island state in their relations with the PRC, confirming yet again the unity of the global community with regard to the one China principle. Thank you. Reuters, are you with us? Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. We are here. We have two questions. You have partially answered one of them. The first question is on the preparations of a state-to-state agreement between Russia and Iran. There has been recent statements about such a treaty by Russia's defense minister and his counterpart of Iran. Can you give us any time frames for the signing of this agreement and the main provisions thereof? The draft new state-to-state treaty is under its final consideration stage. The document is to encompass the entire range of multilateral Russia-Iranian ties, and it will solidify the comprehensive strategic partnership of Moscow and Tehran. By way of reminder, this decision is overdue, indeed, as we have seen more than 20 years since the signing of the current 2001 agreement. Additionally, there have been changes to the global context. And the relationship of our countries sees an unprecedented upsurge. With regard to timeframes, the document is in the pipeline. We are finalizing it, expecting to sign it during one of the meetings in the near future of the leaders of Russia and Iran, but it is the prerogative of the presidential administration to comment on the timeframes and formats of communications between national leaders. Thank you. Our second question is, it concerns the Red Sea developments and the Yemen conflict. You have partially answered this question. I reiterate while commenting on the Chinese colleague's question, but there have been reports that a tanker carrying Russian oil flying the Panamanian flag saw a fall of a missile 500 meters away from it, 90 miles away from the Yemeni port of Aden. How did the MFA of Russia comment on this incident? And the second part of the question, what could be done in order to address at the earliest this situation? Regarding the first part of the question, we saw reports from Reuters media outlet. I'm referring to the 12th of January publication regarding the Gulf of Aden developments. An unknown tanker allegedly carrying Russian oil was hit. However, the MFA of Russia received no official reports on the subject. We, however, consistently advocate the security and safety of navigation, sea navigation for passengers and cargoes in the Red Sea and the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. As we have warned, another reckless operation that is staged in the region, by which I mean Yemeni strikes, led to more escalation. In order to stabilize the situation here at this strategic artery, we need to put an end at the earliest to the bloodshed in the Gaza Strip, to step up efforts to comprehensively address the Palestinian issue on the well-known legal framework, and also to settle the Yemenite crisis through a full format dialogue involving all influential military and political forces of this country. By way of addition, to stop continuous reckless operations of force conducted by NATO members referring to themselves as a coalition without UN Security Council mandate, runs counter to international law. Reckless operations are bad as they are, but they are also bad at carrying them out. In the recent decades, never did they succeed by using these tactics and strategy in improving the situation, alleviating people's suffering, and addressing crises. It is totally on the contrary. The current regional developments are catastrophic as they are, but they continue worsening right as we speak, just because Washington, London, Brussels have been collectively denying their own responsibilities for yet another regional collapse, while the absence of recognition and admission of their own mistakes leads to the repetition and to their exacerbation. Thank you. If it is it, then I give the floor to Moscow Post. Thank you so much. We have two questions. The first one, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of prisoners such as Gonzalo Lira in the Kiev regime prisons, according to permanent mission of Russia at the United Nations. Are there any Russian citizens among them? Yes, indeed. There are quite a number of requests from from Russian compatriots that are imprisoned in the by the Kiev regime. They are all considered at the office of the Russian Human Rights Commissioner Tatyana Maskalkova. There are horrific figures, totally frightening. Unfortunately, these figures are growing without giving them precise numbers. They are just tentative as to what is happening out there. The lives of these people, of some of, we know about some of them. Some did perish in the prisons of the Kiev regime on a daily basis. We use related entities and organizations, and we use our media channels to call upon the international community to make at least something to alleviate the suffering of innocent people. The Kiev regime accuses of their own failures. They label them politically untrustworthy individuals collaborating with the aggressor country, providing no justice, providing no access to lawyers, depriving them of any access to legal associations, lawyer associations, or international human rights institutions. They do not exist.
We saw how they treated Ukrainian citizens who were supported by hundreds of thousands of their supporters, of their supporting compatriots, I mean Ukrainian citizens. They were treated cynically in order to teach a lesson to all the rest, to intimidate them, leave alone those who Kiev regime treat as inhuman beings. They say they are creatures. The figures are overwhelming and the facts are horrific. Thank you. My second question. A sister of the DPRK leader, Kim Jong-un, said the following. In case of even a minor provocation, our troops will be baptized by fire. Was this question and other questions of regional security discussed during the meeting between Minister Lavrov and the foreign minister of DPRK? During the yesterday meeting, the two sides reaffirmed their commitment to oppose to the escalation by the United States and their satellite states. In the near future, we will publish a message on the negotiations because the visit is not over yet, and when it ends, we will publish a commentary. Thank you very much. Newsroom portal, are you with us? We have two questions. The first one is the following. What do you think about Estonian Prime Minister words Kaja Kallas that in 3 or 5 years Russia will pose a serious threat to the eastern flank of NATO? We have already discussed this issue today. I will begin with what I have not mentioned yet. The threat to all these NATO-centric Axis representatives are everyone who do not pay tribute to the West in order to demonstrate their support to neocolonial values. Everyone who call the truth, and the lie, that the lie is the lie. Everyone of this kind poses a threat to them. All those who support basic principles of humanity and our civilization. Those who are courageous enough to say and to defend the obvious things, that there are only two genders, males and females, that children are born males and females, and all those who at the state level or individually or in the capacity of some social and cultural community, supports the preservation of our civilization, its experience, its achievements. They all pose a threat to them. This is a very important issue. It is not us who threaten them. It is them who consider us to be a threat. Over the course of recent decades, they made up a fantasy world of non-existent values, and they call these values neoliberal. They have made up many things. This concept is based with the substitution and the replacing of notions. According to them, freedom is equal to dictatorship, including information and digital dictatorship. They believe it possible to cancel culture and to cherish only these masterpieces that serve to their interests. And so on. There are many examples of such policy. They perceive everything that does not fit into their neoliberal world as a threat. Second point, it refers to endless staffing, endless attempts through Baltic states, Poland, Germany, to trigger this hysteria that the European continent will inevitably be shaken by some global events, by some global shocks, which will affect the whole Europe. If these are their plans, they should speak about them openly. We have always advocated for indivisible security, for overcoming real threats together. We will never allow to threaten our sovereignty and our security. At the same time, we have always called upon searching compromise. But such characters and such figures as Kaja Kallas, the head of emergency situation committee of Sweden, of some German politicians, if these are their plans, they should speak about them openly. Maybe not fairly, maybe not sincerely, but merely openly. Let them stop saying that somebody is going to attack them, that someone is threatening them. If they are feeling a threat to their very fragile world of neoliberal values, it is their problem. If they are seeking to ultimately destabilize the situation on the continent and in the whole world, it is nothing but their position. Thank you very much. My second question. Donald Trump called Joe Biden the worst president in the American history. I repeat, Joe Biden is the worst president in the history of the United States. Do you agree with this position? Or perhaps someone else is even worse? I believe that it is up to the citizens of the United States to decide and to draw conclusions. The most important thing is that their opinion should be considered. We see that even the dead were voting for Biden 4 years ago, and perhaps he thanks them every time. It is important that the voices of the American citizens are heard, who support the principles of democracy and the freedom of expression. They should use their right for the expression of their will during the election campaign and let the American citizens voice their opinion, what they need, and who they like. It is their country. These are their candidates. These are their presidents. But the problem is whether the US citizens will be admitted to the election campaign. Thank you. If no more questions, Al-Maidin, are you with us? Or something else, Al-Maidin? Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. The balance of powers on the Middle East is becoming clearer. The United States are allies with Israel on the one hand. On the other hand, there are different powers who act militarily or politically against US, Israel, beginning from Iran to South Africa or Latin America. Can Russia bring together all these forces? First and foremost, let me disagree with your evaluation of the balance of powers. You mentioned that the US is an ally to Israel in the region. But I believe, basing on the documents, the United States has other allies in the region in line with bilateral documents. It is quite difficult to agree with your assessment of the situation. Perhaps the situation is more complicated. My second point, Minister Lavrov has underscored that Russian diplomacy in principle rejects the method of bringing the sides apart in order to escalate their relations in the future. We do not call upon the partners to make friends against someone, to build blocks against no matter whom, be it Israel or someone else. The main objectives of our efforts are to ensure general de-escalation. We have to prevent bloodshed in the Gaza Strip, together with international and Middle East partners who have a constructive opinion to address all elements, all aspects of Palestino-Israeli conflict on the internationally recognized legal basis. I invite you to visit the press conference of Minister Lavrov tomorrow. I believe that this will be one of the highlight topics of tomorrow's press conference, and perhaps you could elaborate on this question because it is very interesting. My second question. You told that the press conference will be translated into many languages. Why not in Arabic? We translate the text of the press conference in Arabic. This is associated with the peculiarities of the language because the press conference is translated simultaneously. And the text version will be translated into more languages, but a little bit later. Thank you. Russian strategic vector, are you with us? Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. On January the 15th, during the Ministry of Defense briefing, there was a message that the scale of U.S. research of double purpose pose global biological risks and need independent international investigation. Will the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs seek this investigation, and will we elaborate a legally binding protocol to the convention? I believe that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is closely working with the specialized agencies in order to counter biological activities abroad, including in violation of BTWC in Ukraine. We believe that it is a common known fact. We presented our claims during the consultations in Geneva on September the 5th until September the 9th, 2022. Most questions were not answered in line with Article 6 of BTWC. We convened an open UN Security Council meeting to analyze the draft resolution prepared by Russia in order to establish an international commission to investigate questions to the US and Ukraine. regarding the obligations of the Convention and the activities of biological laboratories in Ukraine. Draft resolution consideration was accompanied by an unsubstantiated campaign from the Western delegation. They were trying to accuse Russia of propaganda and misinformation. They were doing everything possible to block the solutions of the UN Security Council by their unilateral declarations. US, Great Britain, and France, they were against the draft resolution, and some member states abstained. What are we doing now? We are pursuing our efforts on specialized multilateral platforms, first and foremost as part of BTWC and UN, in order to address all the issues and claims. The situation in Ukraine demonstrates the need to urgently consolidate BTWC by elaborating legally binding protocol to the convention with the efficient verifying mechanism. We adopt a consistent position with the like-minded states. We advocate for resuming negotiations. In this document, we seek to implement Russia's initiatives to reinforce BTWC. Thank you. If there are no questions, I would like to draw your attention to the press conference of Minister Lavrov, which will be held tomorrow. It will begin at 11 a.m. Moscow time. It will be broadcast on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website with simultaneous interpretation into English, French, and Spanish. Later, the text of the press conference will be published on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website and translated into some more languages. So, see you tomorrow. I wish you every success. Be ready with your questions tomorrow.